Hello. So this semester I've been involved in an ongoing conflict with someone that I care deeply about, and this person is my boyfriend. This conflict comes from back in January. I found out that he had been lying to me about a lot of things in his life that he didn't feel comfortable telling me. I found out that he had been keeping things from me and not being honest about a lot of things that had been going on in his life. And this was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to experience, given that not only he is extremely important to me, but also the things that he was lying about were extremely hurtful. So that's kind of an overview to this conflict, and so now I'm going to be telling you about my behavior and how I reacted to this conflict. So my behavior after reacting to this conflict came about and was kind of like I was entering into the 5 stages of grief. I experienced denial, anger, bargaining with myself to try and do anything to make this pain go away, depression, and also acceptance. During this conflict, I found myself becoming angry one minute, forgiving the next minute, and then reliving the past, which caused a lot of dissonance in our relationship. And I also found that I was experiencing an inner battle with myself as to whether or not I wanted constant conversation about this issue, or if I wanted to be passive aggressive about it until he noticed how I felt. But that's completely different than the way that he reacted to this issue. So the behavior of my boyfriend in the midst of this conflict was extremely different than that of my own. His behavior came more from a place of regret and shame and guilt. In this conflict, he was also very different than myself in that I could sense resentment from him every time that I tried to bring up the conflict and the pain that he had caused me. So that's kind of how our reactions to this differ and how our behaviors were different in this situation. But kind of moving towards what it is about myself that caused me to react this way, what kind of life experiences were the reason behind why I reacted in such a way to this conflict. When considering what it was about me that caused me to react in such a way, my mind went directly to the relationship that I was in before this relationship with my current boyfriend. And although this boyfriend never had lied to me about anything, we still struggled with the same issues that my current boyfriend lied to me about. And having to endure this conversation about the wild college boy phase, I had to kind of endure that not only in my last relationship, but I had to be lied to about it in my current relationship. And I struggled a lot with that. And without going into too much detail about what exactly this topic was about, I will say that I believe that I reacted in such a way because of 2 reasons. And the first reason was that this topic that I was lied to about and this topic that I had to deal with in my last relationship, it was something that we never talked about in my home growing up. We talked about this a lot in class a few weeks ago. It was a taboo topic at Pepperdine, and it was something that I just never talked about with my family. I never had to deal with growing up. And I was so deeply hurt by the things that my boyfriend had lied to me about and didn't know how to move forward because it was about a subject that we never talked about growing up. And I also don't think that I reacted in a way, that may have been good at the beginning. And I think that this was because of my personality. One of my biggest fears has always been hurting someone that I love deeply. And I'm also a people pleaser, and I will do anything and everything to make someone else happy. And this is why this conflict was so difficult for me, because I understand that I need to be empathetic and put myself in my boyfriend's shoes. However, it was so hard for me to accept because I thought to myself, I would never do something like this. I would never lie to someone that I love. And so there were a lot of course concepts that we've talked about this semester that were really helpful in helping me navigate this conflict and kind of getting through this. And the first concept comes from the Joy of Conflict Resolution, and it is about asking open-ended questions and avoiding closed-ended questions. So I learned that it's important to ask these open-ended questions because it gives your partner an opportunity to answer these questions in their own words. It may be helpful to ask them questions that start with, who, what, when. And it's because those close-ended questions really do cause them to become more standoffish and kind of defensive. And I found that by asking my boyfriend those open-ended questions, he was able to kind of express himself in his own words, which really helped us in the end. And the second concept comes from communication, conflict, and the management of difference. And it is that of personal identity and moral context. I learned that you must know who you are before trying to make a relationship work. My moral moral context of kind of knowing my Christian faith and knowing that I desire honesty and integrity in a relationship allowed me to navigate this situation. And it kind of allowed me to make the best decision for myself and my boyfriend as a couple. It's in hard times such as this that my moral context was tested. And so it's important to evaluate this before entering into a dialogue with my boyfriend. And the third concept is that of engaging constructively through dialogue and transformative mediation such as empowerment and recognition, which also comes from the same book of CCMD. And I learned that with this conflict, in order to reach a better outcome, our dialogue must be constructive and centered around empowerment. I found that when I find myself slipping back into my old ways and when I want to have an unhealthy conversation and ask those closed-ended questions, I have to redirect it towards empowerment. That way, I feel better and my boyfriend does too. So we had to engage in that kind of powerful, empowering, and recognizing all of his progress through that dialogue that we would have to have. I also was able to find a journal article from a communication academic journal titled "Resilience Mediates the Relations Between Perfectionism and College Student Distress." And in this article, the content really helped me shape my understanding of this conflict because with my boyfriend's lies came a lot of insecurities about myself, which caused me to feel as though I had to be perfect. I've struggled a lot with that this semester in feeling as though I needed to look the best, be the best, act the best. And because of that, I felt more distressed emotionally than I ever have. And this study talks about the socially prescribed perfection, which is exactly what I have been feeling this semester. And so how does this shape how do I learn from this conflict and experience it from these course concepts? So I learned that this conflict is impossible to solve without honesty and openness. It goes back to this concept of open-ended questions. And you have to be, during this conflict I wrestled with whether or not I should tell him when I was struggling, but I found that we had to have that honesty and openness. I also learned that through this concept of moral context and identity, that it's impossible to face hardships without knowing yourself and knowing your true sense of identity, because when you aren't sure, it allows other people to tell you who you are. And so if I could go back and do this conflict again, I would not say that I would be ready to forgive my boyfriend until I actually was, because I found that by saying, I forgive you, let's move on, and then creating this I would have a setback that was really unhealthy, and I found that created a lot of dissonance in our relationships, and that my boyfriend would wonder why I was still struggling with this entire thing after I made a huge deal about how he was forgiven a few days before. And finally, how has my view of conflict changed as a whole throughout this entire class? My view of conflict has changed during my time in this class in that I see conflict as an opportunity for growth. This class has not shed light on conflict in a negative way, but almost looked at it through a positive lens. Through our various mediation exercises, I have come to realize that conflict is something that can provide contentment for both parties, and that's something that I saw through my conflict with my boyfriend.